Hi everyone, my name is Marie Miao, oncology social worker, and I also oversee our art program. So we are very excited to have you here today for our gouache painting class with Davina Wong, who is familiar to us if you've taken some of her watercolor or oil pastel, and I think acrylic too. So we're very excited to have her teach a new painting medium with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Thanks for having me back here again. I hope everyone's having a good new year. Today, as you've seen, we're going to be working with gouache, which is a paint medium that not a lot of people are familiar with. And it might seem intimidating at first, but we'll guide you through it. And it's not as scary as it might seem. And it's actually very similar to watercolors in that it's a water-based paint medium. But it has, if you can tell in the sample here, it has a little bit more of a matte finish, and it's more opaque than watercolors. And so I'm excited to instruct this class today, and please let us know if you have any questions or if we're going too fast and you need us to slow down or repeat one of the directions. Feel free to leave it in the comments.
Yes, there is a chat box on the side, so please feel free to put in your comments as we go through. We'll get them so that we can answer them during this live class.
All right, let's get started. So you should have received a kit in the mail, and that includes the 12 paints of gouache, a paint palette, here, and a few sheets of watercolor paper, as well as this is the washi tape. We'll be taping down the piece of paper so that it doesn't crinkle and move as we work along, and it kind of creates this nice border when you're finished. And as well as 2 paint brushes. One is the wider tip brush, and one is I call it the detail brush, which is a little bit thinner so that we can use it to paint in some of the details today, and a pencil. And what you will need that's not in the kit is water for the gouache paints to clean your brushes. And you can keep a backup cup on the side so that you could change it out when it gets a little bit too cloudy. And also paper towels or napkins so that you can use it to clean and dry off your brush as you work. All right, so let's start with putting the washi tape onto the watercolor paper. So we'll put it on all sides of the paper to hold it down to the table. Having a hard time finding the end of my washi tape. Oh, there it is.
So this also creates the border.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't have to make it perfectly even, but if you can try to make it a little bit, tape it down a little bit straighter, like halfway, so that it's somewhat even, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
Was there an inspiration to this painting for this time?
Oh yeah, I was inspired by George O'Keeffe's paintings. If you're not familiar with her, she did a lot of flower paintings. And I recently went to a museum, the Whitney Museum in New York. And someone asked which side of the paper. So sorry, I should have went over that earlier. But if you notice that one side of the paper has more texture than the other. I know a lot of times with watercolor, you want to use a side with more texture, but in this case, either side is okay. So they're both textured, but one side has a little bit more than the other. But gouache is a little bit less watery, so you can use either side. Thanks for asking the question. Hopefully that clarifies. So I was saying that I was inspired by a painting that I saw in the museum by George O'Keeffe, and a lot of times she's famous for her flower paintings, which are actually zoomed in very closely, so you could see all the details of the flower, the petals, the colors, and the pistil, like the center of the flower and the different parts of it. And so I wanted to do something similar, maybe not as zoomed in, but large scale enough where it fills up most of the page. And what I love about how she liked painting these flowers is that her whole idea behind it was that she lived in New York for a time, and she noticed that people were just in the hustle and bustle of life and not really taking time to stop and observe what was around them. And so by doing that, she wanted people to see the details that they often miss because they're so busy with their lives. And I feel like that applies to us even today.
Especially today,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
To take time.
Yeah.
To not just take time to smell the roses, but to just observe your surroundings, the people and the things around you, and just take everything in. Yeah. All right, so let's start with taking the wider brush. Or sorry, before we begin, let's put in the paint in the paint palette. So we'll be using vermilion, which is the orange color, orangish, a little bit like an orangey, almost red color. So this will be used for the petals of the flower. So you can add about a pea-sized amount in there, and we can always add more if needed. And we're also going to use, I like to add just a tiny dab of crimson red, which gives it a slightly rosier color, just a tiny amount. I don't know if you can
So
tell,
on the same.
Yeah, in the same paint quadrant.
Okay.
And we're also going to be adding ochre, which is a neutral color. So anytime you add neutral tones such as ochre or any browns to one of the primary or secondary colors, you'll get more of a neutral version of the color. So it tones down the pigment a bit, which sometimes gives it a little bit more of a natural color, which I like. So we'll add less than the orange color, so less than a pea-sized amount. And we can adjust as we go too. A lot of times I add more or less of a color depending on what color I'm trying to achieve. And we'll add just a dab of white, about the same amount as the ochre. So we'll have 4 colors inside the first quadrant. Okay, and then we're going to mix this later on, and then we're going to add it to the next quadrant to add the slightly lighter shade in the middle. So we can begin by mixing it with the wider brush, just to see if it's the color that we're looking for. Let's see. Oh, yours is a nice rosy color.
And I think everybody's colors will be a little slightly different shades, which is perfectly fine.
And if you want it to be less neutral and a little bit more red, you can add more of the crimson. Or if you want it brighter, you can add more of the vermilion. I might add maybe a little bit more of the orange. I like your color.
Yeah,
yours is a nice rose.
Yeah.
So it'll be fun to see how everyone's flowers turn out. So there's no right or wrong way to mix the colors. It just depends on preference. I think that's like the beauty of painting, is that there's no perfect or right way to do it. So we're just here to give you some techniques and some of the tools, and you can have the freedom to make it your own. so after we mix the color, we can add dab a little bit into the second quadrant. And then we'll add more white to it, so that'll make it a little bit lighter for when we need to add the lighter shade midway. As you can tell, there's like a gradient as the petals go down from dark to light. And just mix that up.
And our hope is you'll learn these techniques so that you'll continue to do this at home and use this as a tool, as one of your self-care and ways to release stress or anxiety, get your mind off of things, do this cancer journey. So.
Yeah, art is definitely a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
And you can bring it along with you. You know, if you're going somewhere, you have some downtime, you can put it all in a little bag and bring some paper with you and just paint.
Yeah, I think that's what I love about painting the most is, you know, with watercolor, they have those portable travel tins that you can bring with you. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Oh yeah, I like how they're different.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how they'll turn out. Okay, so we're gonna mix the third quadrant, which will be for the center of the flower. So for the center of the flower, we'll use yellow and ochre, as well as white. So for this one, we're gonna put them into the paint quadrant, but we won't mix it for now. So we can kind of have different colors to choose from and mix later on when we get to that point. So you squeeze just a little bit, not too much. Let's say like a small amount of each. For the fourth quadrant, we're going to make the darker version of this, which will be the petals in the back. So we can take the orange again and just a tiny bit of the red, as well as the burnt sienna. Oh, we have a question. If we wanted to get more of this paper, what type is it? I should have brought the notepad with me.
Good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is watercolor paper, as I mentioned before. And this one I purchased from Blick art store, and they sell it in a pad. And the brand is Canson. I believe it's Canson. And it'll say watercolor paper, and it's a blue one. So you can purchase it online, or you could purchase it in the store. Michael's also has watercolor paper. The key is to get thicker watercolor paper so it doesn't ripple. I think this one was, I can't remember how many pounds.
MSG, or what?
The pounds.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we can probably go back and put it in, right?
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, we'll go back and we'll put it in there for you guys. Sorry, I should have brought the actual pad with all the information. But yeah, most any watercolor paper that's listed as watercolor paper that has a certain amount of weight to it is good. And it can be overwhelming because they have a ton of different ones. But I feel like this brand, the Canson one that they sell at Blick, but also Amazon I think has sold it before too, is pretty economical compared to the rest. Okay, so for the back petals, we'll use, again, the vermilion orange, a tiny bit of crimson red, and burnt sienna. So it'll be a slightly darker version of the first paint quadrant that we were making for these petals. I can't believe we're already going towards the end of January already.
I know.
This year is already going by quickly.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, so we'll take the brush and mix it.
With the large brush again.
Yeah, we'll start with
Okay.
the large brush again. We'll mix it up just so we have it ready. Sometimes I mix the colors as I go along, but for the sake of convenience, I think we'll just put it all here so we have it ready as we start painting. So it gives you guys enough time to work on your painting. So I don't know if you can tell, but this one's just a slightly darker version of this one. So you generally, whatever is darker is in the shadow, right? So like this painting here, the petals in the back will be darker to give it more of the illusion that it's behind the front petals. And it gives it a little bit more depth. And we can also use this color for shading later. So at the end, I tend to add a little bit more of the darker shades on the edges. And we can go over that later as we begin painting, so it makes more sense then. Okay, and then, let's see, maybe, okay, we'll do work on the fifth quadrant, which will be for details, like the shadowing in between the petals. So for that, we will use the burnt sienna again, which is the brown, and let's see, a tiny bit of red, a tiny bit of black, and then we'll use just a slight dab of the red again. So this one, because black is such a strong color, so black will darken any color. So anytime you add black, it makes it a slightly darker version. So we only need a tiny bit of black. So I'd say for the shadows, let me show you. We're just gonna squeeze it very lightly. If you can see here, just a tiny amount of black will do. And then I'm gonna add the burnt sienna brown. That one I'll do about a pea-size amount. And I try to keep the black away so that I can just slowly add the black in, because sometimes if I do it all at once, the black becomes too overpowering.
That makes sense.
And then just a smidge of the crimson red. Small amount of red. Oops, I should have put some paint on the table. Okay, so I'm just gonna slowly mix it. I'm just gonna take a little dab of the black and then mix it to see how the color turns out, so that's not too dark. So since it's not too dark, I'm going to add just a little bit more black, just a tiny dab. And we can always add more later as we go. right, and then after that, the last one will be for the background. So the background, I chose a pale green color, but you guys are welcome to use a different color if you'd like. For mine I mixed the pale green with a lot of white and water to create more of a wash. But usually if the foreground is more of like a warm color, which are like the reds and oranges and yellows, in this case it's kind of a warm neutral color, I like to choose something that's the opposite, which would be a cool color. So the greens and blues, purples are cool tones, so that way it gives it a contrast so that the foreground will stand out more. So you can use green as well, or you can use, you know, like a blue if you like, or purple. Any of the colors will look good with the painting. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of green because it's going to be a wash, so I don't need too much color.
Should we mix it?
We can mix it later. So
okay.
Yeah, we can just leave that one as a little bit more white. And since I like things a little more neutral, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of the ochre color. If you want to. You don't have to. If you want it to be a little bit more of a pure bold color, you can just leave it. Okay, so I just added a tiny dab of the ochre color to the green and the white that I chose. So hopefully you guys have been able to catch up with the paint palette so that we can begin painting now. Or first we're going to sketch the flower and then we'll begin painting.
Perfect.
Okay, so as we sketch the flower, just try to keep in mind to fill up most of the space. So I'm going to start, and you can draw the flower in the center, or if you want it slightly off-centered, which is what I did here. I drew the center of the flower, the circle, more to one side. So I'm going to start by drawing the center circle here. And try to use light sketching motion so that as you paint it won't show through the paint. But sometimes if I sketch and use too much pressure with a pencil, I just use the eraser to lightly erase the pencil marks so that they're not as visible. So you can always do that as well. So after you've decided where you want the center to be.
Oh, your circle is much bigger than.
I know, it's hard to think big sometimes, even though this is a small piece of paper.
Okay.
I think we usually tend to draw smaller so we have enough space. But I made mine like almost the size of a quarter. Yeah, I would say it's about the size of a quarter. Or
yeah,
nickel.
mine
Maybe
was looking like smaller than a penny, so.
That's okay. That way you have more room to also draw on the details of the center of the flower. Okay, so after you've drawn the center, the circle, we're going to draw the petals. So I was inspired by the dogwood flower, which has like 4 petals. So we'll start with the top, and then the bottom, and then we'll do the sides. Okay, so I'm going to start by, and something to keep in mind is the bottom part as we go up drawing the petals to make the bottom a little bit more narrow so we have room for the back petals. So there will be 4 back petals between each one. So we'll start with the first one, which is right above the center of the flower. So you go up, and I'm going to get close to the top before I end the flower and kind of dip. And you can make it any shape you like. I try to make them all a little bit different so it looks like there's more movement in the flower to give it more of an organic feel. So I'd say it looks sort of like the shape of maybe almost like a heart. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or like a tooth, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So after we do the first petal, then we can move on to the petal right below it.
Okay.
I kind of gauge it that way so it's easier to space it out.
Okay.
Okay, so you do the same thing, but kind of like the mirror image of the first petal. So right below it, we're going to do this one right here. I'm going to go down. And when you sketch, it's easier if you use light little strokes so that you can think about how you want to shape the petal. Yeah, that looks good.
Okay.
And then we'll do the sides. So I'm going to do my left side first, which would be this side. So same thing, leaving a little bit of space in between. I'm going to go towards the end of the page. And erase you can lightly erase any extra strokes you might have to clean it up a bit. And when I do the fourth petal, I'm not going to have any more space, which is fine. So I'm going to have my fourth petal sort of go off the page, as this one is kind of off the page as well. So just small strokes. They kind of remind me of angel wings a little bit too.
Yeah, this is actually how my daughter draws her hearts, so it's pretty cute.
That's really cute. Perfect for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Okay, and then after you finish all 4 petals, then we can wedge the petals between each of these. So we'll start by doing the one on this side, on the one right side, I guess for you guys, but to our left.
Okay.
So the left petal in between. Just draw like a little ripple in between so that it would just connect the 2 petals. That kind of looks like a bridge. And then the rest of the petal is technically behind the front petal, so you don't need to make the whole petal visible. And then after you've done this one, then we can just move downwards, counterclockwise, just to fill in between each of the petals. Okay, and then I move on to the third one. And then the last one. All right, are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so hopefully you guys are able to follow along. I'll give you just a moment to finish up. And remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. The petals don't all have to look like they're the same shape or same size. In fact, one of mine is larger than the other. That's just, I feel like it just makes the painting more unique. All right, so we can start by painting the center of the flower, the circle. I'm going to use the smaller brush, the detail brush, to do that. So dip it in the water. So when you paint, you just want to make sure as you're painting to make strokes like this. I used to teach at a private art studio, and my boss would teach me this method. She calls it breath stroke, where she goes like this, even with the pencil and the brush. And she said, imagine each stroke as a breath. So if you go like this, it's easier to paint, and it kind of gives your paintings a little bit more light, I feel like. So we don't want to smash the brush, and I always tell my kids is don't smash the brush, but to just go lightly like this.
The instinct is to like put pressure on it, so that's a nice reminder.
Just think of it as releasing each breath. Okay, so I'm gonna mix the water and use this. I'm gonna use a little bit of the ochre, like a dab of the ochre, and mix it with some of the white to kind of mix on the side. I don't know if you can tell here. Kind of mixing the own color here on the side. The yellow I'm gonna save later to draw the little, I forget what we call those little strokes inside the center of the flower, like the filaments, I think. I don't remember exactly what they're called.
You're asking the wrong person.
Okay, and the reason why I want to do the center first, so it gives us enough time for the center to dry, and then we can add the details in later. And if the paint seems a little dry, you can add just a tiny bit of water, just lightly dab it in the water so that the paint can glide on a little bit more smoothly. Okay, how are you doing?
Good.
And we want to paint in circular motion as the shape of the center of the flower. Oh, looks good. Okay, now we can move on to the petals. So we'll take the larger brush and just lightly dab any excess water on the side. I just kind of brush it like this. And then we're going to go back to the first quadrant for the petals. So dip your brush in and coat it with a good amount. We may need to add more paint maybe, but we're just going to paint the first quarter of the end of the petal, so this part here. And then when you paint, try to think again of the breath stroke. Brush like this. Okay, so think of it as moving the petals towards the center of the flower, but we're only going to paint the first quarter of it. So I kind of go around first and then to kind of cover the ends. And then as you get to the end of this petal, then you paint upwards like this. I don't know if you can see here the brush strokes. So paint up like this. Kind of like you're, I guess, like paddling on a boat. Paint upwards. Like this, so you can see the paint strokes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, you're doing good.
I feel like the hardest part of painting is knowing when to stop.
And even if sometimes if you feel like you've overdone something, you can always go back and fix it. The beauty of gouache paints is that even though it's dried, you can always add a little bit of water and still mix it on the paper, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
So if you finish the first one, you can dip your brush in the water again. I think mine might need a little bit more water, so I'm just going to dip it in the water and then go back to the paint and mix it around. And then move on to the next petal to the left. And the same thing, we'll kind of go around the sides, fill it in. I like to do the edges first and then the end just paint upwards like this. Again, in the breaststroke movement. Sort of flick the, like that. Yeah, okay. Sort of flick the brush, and it creates those little brush strokes. And if you finish the second petal, then you can move on to the third and also the fourth if you want to go ahead. Do you have a favorite museum that you visited or favorite art museum?
I guess over here, I do like the LACMA.
Yeah, that's a fun museum.
Yeah.
The one with the lights, right? With the lamp posts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been there in a while, but yeah, they always have some fun exhibits and
they do
permanent collections.
They have like very interesting flowers planted there too. So it's interesting.
I know,
like
I don't really know
unusual ones that you don't
like
normally.
outside in the garden area. I know, I need to go back and visit sometime. I feel that's the nice thing about visiting art museums is there's something new every time, whether it be a new exhibit or something that you've never noticed before. But now it's so nice that you can also see a lot of museums online. I remember. Oh
yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, they had a virtual showing of different museums. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just pretty neat because you could go. You could even see like the Natural History Museum in DC.
Yeah,
virtually.
You could do the zoo too.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, we saw a live footage of animals.
Oh, you could see them moving around and.
Yeah, it was a live footage of the zoo, so we saw like penguins and yeah, it was pretty neat.
Oh, that's cute. The San Diego Zoo?
I forgot which zoo it was, but I remember they had pandas and penguins and like other cute. I think they had lions too.
Well, now we know. In our free time, we can.
Yeah.
You can go anywhere. You can go anywhere in the world now.
Virtually.
Yeah. Virtually. Okay, so the fourth petal that I did is the one that's off the page. So instead of doing a fourth color, I'm going to do like probably more of an eighth because imagining that most of the petals are already off the page. So I'm just going to do a smaller amount of it, just a little dab of it, just enough so I can move the color along later. Okay, I'm glad we had enough to paint. And if your brush seems dry, you can add just a dab of water to it. Okay. And then I'm going to clean the brush. And then we'll move on to the second lighter tone here, which is in the second quadrant. do the same thing, and this one we'll do, again, 1/4 of the amount, similar to the first one. In the same motion, starting at the end where these other brush strokes were. So continuing where the white part is, we'll add the lighter tone. And then something to keep in mind is to make the strokes slightly longer on the sides so it looks kind of like a curve as you paint in the brush motion like this. Oh, that's a pretty pink color.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then move on to the next one. I feel like this type of painting is very therapeutic because it's a little bit less of making something look realistic and having to follow the actual still life or flower that you're painting, but you can have the freedom to improvise and make it your own, and you almost don't really have to think too much about it because you're repeating the same thing for each petal. So it's very relaxing. You can just turn on some classical music or your favorite track and just paint and enjoy the process. Okay, I'm going to move on to the third petal, same thing. I'm going to move along a little bit faster just so we have time to finish. Okay, go on to the last petal. And then once you finish all 4 petals with the second lighter tone, clean your brush and then leave it a little bit wet. And then I'm going to pull from the bottom of the paint here some of the color so that I get sort of a wash. Doing the same thing, but this one will be more like a paint wash. You can see here. So just pulling the color from
that's really
top.
pretty.
So it just gradually gets lighter. And as it dries, it'll look different too. So with gouache, the paint, lighter color paints tend to get a little bit darker as it dries, and darker paints tend to get a bit lighter as they dry. So it leaves a matte, opaque finish. And then leaving a little bit of white space, about, I would say, like a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of white space between the center of the flower and the end of the petal. So we'll go around doing the same thing for each of the petals. Again, in the breaststroke movement, dragging just the ends of the color forward. And when you finish this one, you can go back and try it again with different colors if you'd like, and experiment with different petals, or you can maybe do a smaller one if you want, or a larger scale.
Yeah, it's nice because you taught us the foundation of making a flower, so it's I feel more confident in trying other flowers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not as intimidating as it seems.
Yeah, I was initially telling Davina, I don't know how I could paint this one. I was looking at this, her finished flower, and it looked intimidating. So I wasn't sure how I would do today, but it's very fun.
You're doing good. Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
I'm sure every one of you are doing a great job too.
Yeah.
So we're often our worst critiques, our own worst critics, but I think the important thing is to remember to just enjoy and have fun. Okay, so I'm going to dip the brush in water again to clean it out, and go down to the last part of where the wash paint was, and to just lightly fill it to the center, so it almost looks white, but it's a very light wash of color. Just dragging it towards the center of the flower. Okay, and once you finish that, we would have completed the foreground of the front petals, and then we'll work on the back petals. Okay, so we'll start with, you can pick pretty much any of these petals in the back, and then we'll start with the darker color that we made in the fourth quadrant. So you can keep your brush a little bit wet so that you can mix it with the paint, so it's not too thick. So same thing, we'll be doing the brush stroke motion. Oh, we have a note. Oh. See, for the lighter section, do you just mix a little of white and yellow? Sorry, I missed that part. Oh, okay. So for I think they meant the lighter section here, the second quadrant. So it was the same colors that we created here, and I took the brush and I took a swab of it and put it in the second quadrant and added white. So hopefully that makes sense. And I think I add also a little bit more ochre and make it slightly neutral. But yeah, if you add this color, the first one that you made, and put it into the second quadrant and add white, it'll make it lighter. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. So we're going to paint between the petals the darker tone and go halfway. And if you have a smaller space in between your flowers, you can use the detail brush as well to get into the little nooks and crannies. Sometimes it might be a little easier so that you don't touch too much of the other petal. The same thing, do the brush motion, ending at the middle or a little bit over middle is okay too. I think I might use the detail brush for the rest of this because I have some tighter spaces here. When you hold the brush for detail, it's a little bit easier to hold it straight like this, and then just lightly use a light touch with the brush stroke motion like this, and then it'll be easier to get the detail parts in. It's a little bit easier to hold it like with precision. I'm going to move on to the last petal, last back petal. this one a little bit longer. And you can go back and sort of make them a little more even if you want. How much color you extended.
Okay.
Okay, and then after that, you can take the larger brush again, dip it in water, and kind of clean it out, and then dip it in a little bit of the same color that we used, and just line the edges here at the end, just very lightly, the back of the back petals. Oh, can you talk a little bit more about the health benefits of painting? That's your expertise of art, art therapy, or healing.
Been a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, because I think healing arts is still a topic that's not been researched as much as we'd like, but within cancer or people who are undergoing illnesses, it really does help. It's not so much the end project of the art that you're creating, but the process of it all is helpful for stress relief. It helps, it's a form of meditation. It's a form of coping that you can use as almost like another form of language that you can use to interpret or express your emotions and feelings of what you're going through with your cancer treatment. And so although you might not be verbally expressing how you're feeling onto the paper, you're able to do that through the colors, the process of using your hands. So those are some of the benefits, and yeah, I can continue to share more, but I know we're running a little bit of time, so I will definitely continue to add more as we have more classes every month this year. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's something to be said about completing like an artwork, whether it be small or big, and taking pride in ownership into creating something, and just being able to enjoy it or share it with someone brings a lot of joy.
Yeah, and you know, it's really just how this process of creating this art means to you, not so much analyzing the project, but how you're feeling through the process of creating this art. So, yeah.
So keep painting.
Yeah, I mean that's why we have these classes. You know, we have so many different classes because those are all beneficial ways for you to be express your emotions, not just through talking and therapy, but through exercise or art, some other healing measures through Qigong and Reiki. So, yeah.
Okay. Because after you finish the edges of the petals, you take the clean brush and just fill in the between, dragging the darker paint downwards again so that the paint colors meet. And then hopefully after we finish this, if you don't have time to finish all the petals, don't worry about it. You can finish coloring the rest later on, but I'll show you the shading first, so that make sure we have that part in, because that's an important part of this painting as well. So I want to make sure you guys get that. So you can always go back in and finish the details of the coloring on your own once this video is finished.
Good.
Oh, that's good. See, are you surprising yourself?
I've enjoyed the process of it.
Okay. And the fun part is shading, adding the shade, because then you can see the depth between the light and the dark petals. So for the shading, we'll use the detail brush. And we use the darker color where we mix the burnt sienna with the little tiny bit of black, and I think I also added a little bit of the red to it to create this darker brown color. So I might add just even a little bit more black to make it a little bit darker. And then wipe off the excess paint, and we'll use that in between the petals in the front near the center. So I'm gonna go, let's see, dip a little bit more water, just in between, and dab the sides a little bit, down to, I would say, like a quarter to halfway point of the sides, and then do the breath stroke brush movement in between. So that creates more shadowing. And then you can go back later and add a little bit of water to blend it a little bit more.
Yeah, they say that when you know, when your hands are busy, that's when your serotonin levels rise. So
Oh, I
yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
That's kind of, you know, when you do any form of art, really, or like crafts, craftsmanship.
I mean, you're good with your hands of creating and crafting.
Oh, that's really pretty.
Oh, yours looks really nice too. I like the colors of how that one turned out.
Like, hoping we make it in time. We might not be able to do the background, but at least we could.
Yeah, work on the, and I could quickly go over the background too, so we have time.
Okay.
So as you can tell, there's a bit of a shading here, and then you can take the larger brush, dip it in water, just water, and then you wipe off just a bit of the excess, and then go in to the ends of the brown to kind of pull it downwards so that it blends a little bit more seamlessly. Halfway. And then the same color can be applied towards the ends, just slightly. Just a little bit on the ends. Kind of give it more depth. And then let me show you the center of the flower too. So the colors that we created here with the yellow, ochre, and white. To do the center, since it's a detail portion, you want to dry the detail brush well, and maybe even pat it on the towel. And I'm just going to pick up the white, and then just add a little bit of paint to the tip, and do a brush stroke movement like this again, but holding it straight. And just very lightly do little strokes for the center. And then you can also add the yellow with the white. And just very lightly, kind of like making little blades of grass. So you can add different colors like the white and the yellow and the ochre, maybe mixed with some of the white and yellow. And just very lightly make little strokes like this.
Does gouache tend to dry faster than acrylic, or?
I feel like it dries quicker than acrylic. Acrylic is a little bit thicker because it's plastic. It's like plastic based. This is similar to watercolor, so I feel like it dries quicker. And sometimes with acrylic, we layer on like a thicker layer of paint. But once acrylic dries, we can't rework it like you can with gouache. And then you can even add maybe a dab of the darkest brown burnt sienna. Just a little bit if you want a little bit of details of the center strokes. And then I'll go over the background really quick so we have time. So I'll use the new water for the background just to ensure that it doesn't mix with the dark tones that we use for the flowers. So make sure the brush is clean. And then go to the colors you chose for the background. So I had chose white and green, and I wanted just a tiny dab of ochre. So I can mix it up and you can add some water to it to make it more of a wash. So I'm adding some drops of water to dilute the paint. And then you can start by painting the background. And I like to leave a little bit of white space, I would say about 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch from the foreground of the painting. So it kind of gives it more of a glowy look. So I add water as I go too. So the nice thing about gouache is you can also mix it on the paper. So you can add water and keep going, leaving a little bit of the white space here, as you can see. And if you want the background to have different depths of color, you can also add a little bit more like the darker tones if you didn't mix all the color yet to one side, so there's just more, adds more dimension to it, so it's not just one color. Oh, that's a pretty blue. I like that.
It's a lot darker than I thought.
You can add more water if you want to.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that too, like the opaque color.
See, even I get stuck in the, oh, I want it to look a certain way, but that is not the point of these glasses.
Yeah, mine didn't look the way that I did the first time around too. It just it always changes and it'll look different.
It's sometimes one of those natural instincts, but it's really, you know, it's very calming, the whole process. So that's what matters.
Exactly. So it's a little bit of time. I'll just add some of the details of the shading with the detail brush with the darkest color. So as you can see, when you add it's just the sides of the back petal, then you can bring out the front of the petal a little bit more. And going upwards like this. And then taking the water to blend it. Some people mix the colors for gouache paint onto the paper as well, so that's also an option if you're painting something and kind of a free painting. You can just mix the colors directly onto the paper.
All right. Okay, well, we are going to wrap this up, but I think hopefully everybody got the instructions and is hopefully almost done. We are running out of time today. It was a very nice, relaxing process through it all. Thank you so much for being here, and we have another class next month. We hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you.